What's the grossest thing you've ever done that you enjoyed? My wife and I had two wonderful daughters, ages 13 and 10, and a seemingly healthy relationship. At some point, things started to feel weird. Suddenly, she became very attached to her phone, disabled the password saving feature on our shared computer, and started receiving phone calls that would end abruptly when I walked into the room. You can probably guess what it was. After 15 years of marriage, I was hoping that this wasn't what it obviously seemed like. Then one day, when she said she was going to spend some time with the girls, I decided to follow her. Sure enough, I found her heading to a hotel to meet a guy I'll call Steve. To say it was a gut-wrenching understatement is an understatement. I cried for an hour straight. After I got over my self-pity phase, I decided that the best solution would be to get even. I ran through several scenarios, some of which might or might not involve hurting Steve. Eventually, I settled on something more civilized and, more importantly, legal, but only up to a point. The first part of the plan was to gather evidence. I could have simply taken a picture, but I had something better in mind. One day, when my wife was at work and the kids were at school, I set up some small hidden cameras and microphones that I had purchased. Because of the layout of our bedroom, I was able to position one of them perfectly overlooking the bed. However, I didn't use it while I was home. A few days later, I suggested to my wife that the second weekend after that, I should take the girls on a trip and spend the night away. I usually did the cooking and took a much more active role in raising the girls, showing more patience and attention. She was usually busy working or drinking, so me going out alone with the girls wasn't unusual. 2 weeks passed, during which time I got everything sorted and contacted the lawyer to prepare a separation agreement that included me keeping the house and custody of the kids. I went on the trip, tried not to give the girls any clues, and waited to see if Steve and my wife would fall for the trap. When I got back, I checked the footage from the weekend, and sure enough, it was a 36-hour festival. When they weren't doing what you'd imagine, the dialogue was even more revealing. I discovered that Steve had a wife. But the worst part was hearing how they talked about me. I had expected the attempts to destroy my self-esteem, but hearing things like how my friend's size was comparable to a little finger and still losing in that comparison, something that had always been an insecurity of mine, and since I didn't satisfy her, it was devastating. The most painful thing was hearing her tell Steve my deepest secrets and embarrassing stories that I had only confided in her. They even laughed at the time when I had no expectations in life. I tried to take my "it's better not to say that." At that point, I had no more doubts about what to do. The next day, I waited for the kids to leave, but before my wife left, I let everything seem normal. I kissed her on the cheek, wished her a good day at work, and watched her walk out the door with the same false calm she'd been carrying for the past few months. But deep down, I had already decided that this would be the last day she would believe she was in control of the situation. As soon as she left, I got to work. I pulled out the recordings and calmly edited the videos, selecting the most shocking parts that made the level of betrayal clear. It wasn't just about the physical act, although that was enough, but also about the things she said about me and shared with Steve, things I never imagined a wife would expose to a stranger. It was humiliating, cruel, and at the same time, exactly what I needed to turn the tables. That same day, I sent messages to all of her close family and friends, including her parents, sisters, cousins, and some of her closest co-workers. I invited them to a surprise party to celebrate a special moment in our marriage. I didn't specify which one. I used a neutral excuse, something like, "I want to celebrate our union and the family we've built." This would ensure that she wouldn't suspect anything until the crucial moment. I spent the day decorating the house, buying drinks, food, and even a cake. I didn't want anything out of the ordinary to show. However, my real preparations were hidden away on my computer and phone. I created a presentation that mixed happy family photos and, at the very end, I included the videos captured by the cameras. That evening, the guests started arriving. My wife arrived a little after work, apparently surprised and even touched by the gesture. She laughed, chatted with the guests, and seemed to have no suspicions. "You're amazing for organizing all this," she said, hugging me. I hugged her back. The hug, but inside I felt a mixture of nerves and a morbid pleasure for what was about to happen. After a few hours of socializing, I asked for everyone's attention. "I'd like to show you something special," I announced with a smile that disguised my anger. I turned on the projector and the presentation began. The first images were innocent, photos of us together, moments with the children, memories that everyone there shared. My wife looked at the screen smiling, not realizing what was coming. Then, everything changed without warning. The screen showed the first recording, her entering the room with Steve. The sound of laughter and conversation between them filled the room. The guests fell silent, some in disbelief, others embarrassed. My wife froze, her eyes wide. "Is this what you do while I take care of our house, our children?" I said, my voice calm, but full of contempt. She started to mumble something, but the next scene cut short any attempt at explanation. A dialogue between her and Steve, where they both laughed at my insecurities, mocked me, and she revealed intimate details that I never imagined could be exposed in that way. The following minutes were chaos. The room was in shock. Some family members looked at her with disgust. Others looked at me as if they couldn't believe I had the courage to expose everything like that. My wife, desperate, tried to turn off the projector, but I was prepared. "Sit down," I shouted firmly, making her stop. She fell into the chair, tears streaming down her face. When the last video ended, the room was completely silent. I took out my cell phone and, without anyone noticing, I started recording the environment, the reactions, the looks of disapproval and the humiliation written all over her face, as she tried to explain herself to those present. It was too late. The damage had been done. Later that night, with the edited video of the party, including the footage of the betrayal, I sent it all directly to Steve's wife's Instagram. I didn't have to say anything. The images spoke for themselves. A few hours later, I received a notification. She had seen the message. It didn't take long for the bombshell to go off on the other side as well. In the end, as I watched the chaos unfold, I realized something. Despite everything, I had taken pleasure in carrying out every detail of this revenge. Yes, it was cruel, it was disgusting, but for some reason it was exactly what I needed to move on. And now, her life would never be the same again. After the party, everything changed forever. My wife, now ex-wife, tried to reach out to me several times in the weeks that followed. She cried, begged, and swore that it had all been a mistake. But what irritated me the most was that she never truly apologized for what she had done. There was no genuine regret for the cruel words, the secret they had shared, or the betrayal itself. She just regretted getting caught. This only confirmed what I already knew. I needed to move forward, but not before making sure she faced the full consequences of her choices. My first priority was to take care of the girls. They were young, but they weren't stupid. Even though I had kept them from attending the party, what had happened had somehow reached them. Maybe a relative, maybe a whisper from a schoolmate whose parents had mentioned the gossip. They came to me with questions, and I tried to be as honest as possible without going into unnecessary detail. "Your mother made choices that hurt our family," I said, "and unfortunately that meant things would never be the same." It was hard to see the disappointment in their eyes, but at the same time I knew I couldn't shield them from everything. This mess was a direct result of their mother's actions, and she would have to deal with the consequences. Meanwhile, my ex-wife was beginning to feel the weight of what had happened. The public humiliation in front of friends and family was just the beginning. She tried to return to work as if nothing had happened, but the atmosphere was no longer the same. People whispered in the hallways, and she was avoided at lunches and meetings. A week later, she quit, claiming she was being bullied, but the truth was that she couldn't face people. Steve, on the other hand, disappeared almost completely. His wife, after receiving the evidence I sent, filed for immediate divorce. From what I've heard from common sources, he lost his job too, probably because the scandal eventually reached his bosses. It was a double blow for him. No wife, no job, and it seemed no courage to face the shame. But for me, that still wasn't enough. As much as it had made a significant impact, I wanted to make sure this was more than a passing moment. I wanted the truth to be out there, exposed so that no one would ever believe any watered-down version that my ex-wife or Steve might try to tell. So I started editing the videos. I removed any parts where she and Steve mentioned my insecurities or shared intimate details about me. I didn't want my name to be associated with this dirt any more than necessary. My goal was to make them seen for who they really were, without making me the target of malicious comments. When I was finished, I uploaded the video to various YouTube platforms under a pseudonym, describing the story as a story of betrayal and exposure on social media platforms like Instagram and Twitter. I used fake accounts to share the content, ensuring that it reached those who could amplify its reach. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers who love a good gossip. I knew it wasn't exactly ethical, but at the time it seemed justified. The impact was almost immediate. The story began to circulate quickly, gaining traction on forums and discussion groups. Comments like, "This woman destroyed her family," and "Cheating is disgusting, but laughing at someone's insecurities is even worse," flooded the posts. My ex-wife became the target of massive criticism. Within days, she deleted all her social media and went into complete isolation. The public shame was unbearable for her. Should I feel guilty? Maybe, but I didn't. For so long, I had been humiliated in silence, carrying the pain of knowing that the person I had shared my life with had betrayed me in every way possible. Now she was experiencing a fraction of what I had felt, and to be honest, that gave me a sense of relief. The only regret I had was the impact this had on my daughters. Despite my attempts to protect them, they ended up knowing more than they should have. School friends started commenting and, inevitably, they put the pieces together. My eldest daughter, in particular, was deeply hurt. "Why did Mommy do this?" she asked one day, with tears in her eyes. I didn't have a comforting answer. All I could do was reassure her that no matter what their mother had done, I would always be there for them. "You are my priority now," I told them both, "and I will do everything I can to make sure you have the best life possible." Over the next few months, I began to rebuild my life. I found a therapist to help me deal with the emotional scars and did my best to create a stable environment for the girls. They still saw their mother from time to time, but their relationship felt strained and distant. As for my ex-wife, I heard she had moved to another city, trying to start over. The last I heard about Steve, he was living with his brother, trying to get back on his feet. I doubt either of them learned anything of real value, but honestly, that doesn't matter to me anymore. In the end, what matters to me is that despite all the pain and chaos, I was able to break free. Revenge may not be the noblest solution, but in this case, it was what gave me the strength to move on. And now, my priority is to put the past behind me and make sure my daughters never feel like they have to carry that burden. The weight of this mess is not theirs. It is entirely their mother's. Months passed, and the dust began to settle. My life slowly found a new balance. My daughters and I settled into a more stable routine, and despite everything that had happened, the bond between us seemed to grow stronger. They still had occasional contact with their mother, but it was clear that the relationship was strained. I did my best not to interfere in this, because despite everything, I knew they needed to decide for themselves how to deal with her. My ex-wife, on the other hand, never fully recovered. After moving to another city, she disappeared from the social radar. From what I heard from acquaintances, she lived in a kind of self-imposed exile, trying to avoid public scrutiny. The irony is that she was never really confronted by all the people who criticized her. The burden she carried was mostly self-imposed as she faced the consequences of her own actions. Steve also went down a path of disappearance. I didn't hear from him again after I learned he had lost his job and his marriage. His story was just another piece in a larger puzzle of bad choices that came to light and ruined lives. As for me, after all I had done, I can say that the feeling of justice came with a certain discomfort. I had achieved what I wanted, to morally destroy the people who had betrayed and hurt me. Their public humiliation was accurate, precise, inescapable. Yet, at the same time, it was the dirtiest thing I had ever done in my life. Watching their faces contort with shame and despair, while their reputations were being torn apart, was somehow gratifying. It was disgusting, yes, but I won't lie. I felt pleasure. Not because I enjoy seeing others suffer, but because it was a direct reflection of what was done to me. That sense of satisfaction, however brief, came with a price. Sometimes I find myself wondering if it was the best course of action. Not about them. They deserved every bit of that exposure. But about myself. Putting it all out there publicly, even excluding my personal parts, was an act that required me to delve into the depths of my anger and indignation. And although I've emerged stronger, A part of me still feels like I touched something dark inside myself to get there. Today, I'm focused on rebuilding a healthy life for myself and my daughters. I've refocused on my relationships with friends that I'd lost sight of during my marriage, and I've even started to think about a future where a new relationship might be possible. But now I'm much more cautious, much more mindful. I no longer allow anyone to cross the boundaries I've set for myself. I learned the hard way that trust is something precious and easy to destroy. Sometimes I still think about how it all happened. I think about how the betrayal started with little lies, moments of neglect and disrespect. I think about how I missed signs that could have changed the course of things if I had acted sooner. But I don't hold on to that anymore. I have no regrets about having exposed the truth, only the certainty that it was the way I found to regain control of my life. And in the end, when I look at my daughters and see that they still have hope, that they still believe in something better, I know I did what needed to be done. Yes, it was the most disgusting thing I have ever done, but in a way, it was also the most liberating. And with that, I close this chapter of my life, ready to look forward and build something new, leaving the weight of the past where it belongs.